Welcome to those of you who are joining us on the YouTube station as well as in here. My name is Sid Smith, and I'm a member of the Faith Formation Committee and host for today. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Christy Miller. Christy is Program Director of GrieveWell, and you will have seen the materials over here on GrieveWell. GrieveWell's mission is to build a community that promotes healthy grieving and healing so that adults can grieve well and lead a full life after loss. GrieveWell was founded in 2010 by Doug and Julie Stotler, who lost their 6-year-old daughter in a bus accident in 2006 and found little support of the kind they needed to help them through their grief journey. By 2017, their organization had grown to include a cadre of trained peer counselors, all of whom experienced a loss in their own lives. And GrieveWell developed a broad mission that includes educational workshops, community engagement, a range of online resources, and qualified referrals for those confronting overwhelming grief. Christy is a licensed clinical social worker with more than 20 years' experience as a psychotherapist, working with individuals, groups, and families. With this extensive practice, she has been credentialed by the Academy of Certified Social Workers. As program director for GrieveWell, Christy trains and guides the peer counselors who work with clients, and she oversees all grief training and workshops, ensuring that they reflect best practices and are informed by real-life experiences. Today, she brings with her to us her great wisdom that she has gained during the years as a grief counselor and GrieveWell program director. Please join me in welcoming Christy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that warm welcome. Thank you, Reverend, for allowing me to come today. I'm so excited to be able to come today and share with you some information about grief and the holidays and also special days. I know that Thanksgiving had already passed this Thursday, which is a difficult holiday for some, and I know we're kind of going into the holiday season. So I just wanted to give you some practical information that you could use while grieving the loss of a loved one. So I just wanted to go through, I have some slides that we'll go through, and you also have a workbook. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is in that workbook. I know some people are like to follow along, and some people are writers. So go ahead, and if you need to take notes, go ahead and do that. I'm very informal. Usually I'm not standing, I'm usually pacing back and forth. So just feel free if you have any questions to stop at any time, and we'll go through that. So I just wanted to go through briefly again a little bit about who we are. As you know, we're a nonprofit in Ann Arbor. We're actually located inside the American Red Cross building in Packard. We rent some office space up there. So we've been there for many, many years. We share space as well with AARP is up there. So if anybody knows that location, that's where we're at, or if you've given blood, we're in that building. As we were introduced, we do offer one-to-one peer support. So they're not group support. It's not group therapy. It's one-to-one. We have volunteers who've experienced a loss, and we match you up with a like loss. So if somebody's lost a spouse or a partner, we match you up with an individual who's lost a spouse or a partner. If you've lost a child, we'll match you up with somebody who's lost a child. And then from there, it's up to the two of you to decide when you want to meet. Once a week is what we would recommend, or sometimes people do that twice a month, and we can follow you up to 9 months free of charge. So we follow people throughout their grief journey. We also realize that family and friends, people may not come to us to seek support, but look to family and friends. And so we really feel it's important to build a compassionate community, because oftentimes family and friends don't know what to say or how to support their loved one. So we really feel it's important to provide some education for that. We also do creative healing events. You will have a handout about support in traditional ways. So we offer grief yoga. If you're interested in grief yoga, that's virtual online. We do a baking class as well, grief baking. We do a grief art class, grief music. We have a poetry workshop coming up this week, as well as grief yoga and grief art. So please feel free to take a look at that. They're all free. You just sign up online and can participate in those events. Before we get into the specifics about kind of grief and the holidays, I wanted to just kind of give you a little bit of a framework about grief, just so that we're talking about kind of the same definitions that I'm talking about. Just so this may be new, this may be old information to you, but we're just going to go through kind of the definitions of what grief are. Grief is a natural reaction to loss. It's our thoughts and feelings that we have about our loss. It is our inward feelings that we have about loss, and that's the biggest thing that I want you to take away from this slide, which is grief is our inward feelings. It's what we're feeling on the inside, okay? So people may not see that, right? We may wear a mask on the outside, but it's what we're feeling on the inside is what grief is. And it's the process of experiencing the psychological, behavioral, and physical reactions as it relates to loss. To me, grief looks like this, right? Kind of blown wide open, just not feeling whole again. This is just a piece of art. There are many art pieces out there, but this one stands out. This one resonated with me in terms of grief. And then I'm just going to talk about mourning, what mourning is. Mourning is the outward expression of grief. So remember, grief is the inward. Mourning is our outward expression of grief. Many people grieve, but they do not mourn, right? They don't show that on the outside. You may see somebody grieving or know that they're going through, and you ask them how they're doing. I'm fine, right? Not sharing kind of what's going on the inside. We express mourning through kind of displays of emotion, art. We may set up scholarships in honor of our loved one. We have a funeral. That's kind of an example of outward expression of mourning, right? People come support us during that time. So I just wanted to kind of share with you those two definitions, just so that you're kind of aware. Grief is the inside. Mourning is kind of what we express on the outside. I just wanted to spend a few moments about myths of grief, just to kind of give you the foundation of grief. There are so many myths out there about grief that we bring kind of forward with us from our own family experiences. Maybe it's even cultural in terms of myths. But these are the big three. There are many myths out there, but these are the big three that I often hear from people when they come to GrieveWell. The first one is the pain will go away quickly if I ignore it. Right? If I ignore my grief and I shove it down and stuff it down, it'll go away quickly. Anybody out there who's grieving? What's the answer to that?
Wrong.
Right. It's not going to happen, right? Because it's going to bubble to the surface. Our body has a way of holding on to that, right? And it's going to come out, whether it's in physical ways, cognition-wise, easily distracted. Maybe we're having pounding heart, difficulty sleeping, appetite changes. So it may bubble up, a couple months. It may bubble up a couple years down the road, right? So again, it doesn't go away if we ignore it. That's just in terms of the fact. It's helpful for grievers if friends don't bring up the subject of loss. What about that one? That's for if you're supporting somebody in grief. That's a big one for people. I don't want to make them sad. I don't want them to be thinking about their loved one. So I'm not going to talk about the loss. Grievers, anybody want to take a stab at that, right?
I find that the friends that wouldn't talk to me about it are really my friends.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
You find out who your close friends are.
You do.
Yeah.
Yep. Those that are willing to go into that vulnerable space with you, right? Yep. Right, so if you're supporting somebody in grief, it's okay to talk about their loved one. We're already thinking about them all the time, right? You're not going to make us feel more sad. That is a myth for people. If it's not the right time or place, we'll let you know that. But please, to say that person's name, to share memories of their loved one, that's how we keep their memory alive, right? Is by talking about them, sharing memories. If you remember something about their loved one, please share that. So again, it's okay to talk about this, to bring up their loved one and to share their name and share memories. Your grief journey should last 6 months. This is a big one. That's a big one that I get, right? That's when we get clients at GrieveWell. People come in and say, I think something's wrong. It's been 6 months, and people, my friends and family, keep telling me I should be over it by now. I'm not. What's wrong with me, right? Grief lasts as long as love lasts. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Grief lasts as long as love lasts, okay? There is no timeline for grief. And so we'll talk about how we grow bigger, we grow around grief, okay? But there is no timeline for grief. So anytime people have that kind of conception in their mind, they're bringing that into their grief. And what does that do for the griever, right? The griever feels like they're grieving wrong. Something's wrong with me because it's been 6 months and I'm still carrying this weight of this grief, right? So again, grief lasts as long as love lasts. Realistic expectations. Your grief will last longer than you expect. Grief takes more energy than you could ever imagine, right? Just to tend to your grief, getting out of bed. Maybe it's just the normal things you used to do on a daily basis have difficulty doing. Maybe, paying attention, concentrating. And then, excuse me, sometimes you feel like you're going crazy because you have all these emotions kind of happening all at once, okay? We can go from worried to sadness to anger to frustration to mood swings, okay? We know that grief is just more than sadness. It's a whole gamut of emotions. I put this in here just because I wanted people to see, oftentimes people have this notion that grief shrinks over time. Grief doesn't shrink. Our life gets bigger. We grow around it. So if you think of kind of like a black circle in the center and you draw a crayon with red around that black circle, then you take a blue crayon and draw another circle around that one and then keep going with different colors. That's what happens. We grow bigger. Our life grows around grief. Okay, the grief doesn't shrink, if that makes sense. The jagged hole, we have a hole in our heart, that hole stays there, but the jagged edges become softened over time, right? How we want grief to work, we want there to be a straight line, a stop and a start, and we want to know how quickly we need to get through it and what do we need to do. Actually, how grief works is actually like this ball of yarn, okay? I'm not going to go through these, but common responses to grief and loss are often in terms of it affects our whole body, our physical, emotional, cognition, relationship, and also our spiritual. The most common for physical is usually sleep and appetite, but there can be many, our teeth clenching, our heart starts beating faster. Emotional, again, we can have tons of emotions. It's not just sadness. We can have the worry, the what ifs, would ifs, should have, could haves, if onlys. That's a big one. In terms of cognition, trouble paying attention, difficulty concentrating. I know for myself during my grief journey, just carrying on a conversation with somebody was difficult. Oftentimes early in the beginning, people would say something to you, and it just took a few minutes for me to be able to process that information before I was able to say something back. Relational, in terms of kind of loss of feeling like you're the fifth wheel, or feeling like you want to be left alone, but hoping that other people reach out as well. And then in terms of spiritual, sometimes it's kind of loss of direction, right? Loss of control in our lives. We're going to not go through the paths of grief. I'm just going to focus on one of them, which is continuing the bond. There are many frameworks around grief. Oftentimes the biggest one that people hear is about Kubler-Ross's stages, which is the one that I had up there about, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the reason for that one is Kubler-Ross, I don't know if you know, was a psychiatrist, and she dealt with terminally ill clients. And so she decided, through her journey and through her research, that people that had a terminal illness went through these stages before they accepted that they were going to die from their illness. What ended up happening was, this was not her choice, but what ended up happening was Western society kind of took hold of that and said, we're going to apply that to all grief, okay? And while some of it makes sense, we know that grief isn't linear. That's the biggest one with that framework. This framework, continuing the bond, this is kind of building in moments to remember and reaffirm our relationship with our loved one, right? It's how do we continue that bond with them even though they're physically not present here on earth. It's during sometimes it could be talking to our loved one throughout the day, right? Looking to them for moral guidance, even though they're physically not here. It could be naming a loved one, a future loved one after our person that died. I know for myself, I have a pair of my loved one's shoes in the garage. I'm not a fixer. I don't know how to tinker around with tools, and so anytime I need to go out in the garage, I put those shoes on just to kind of give me support, to kind of help me in terms of that. Some people see cardinals, right? Cardinals is a big one, or robin, or butterflies, or dragonflies, and they show up at a certain time, or it's ironic that this bird that they've never seen, this blue jay, comes to the deck, and you recognize, like, oh my gosh, my loved one loved blue jays. So again, that's kind of what we call continuing the bond. It's kind of reaffirming and remembering throughout the day our loved one, honoring our grief. And so some things to kind of think about is what do I wish to hold on to and carry forward with me? What do I wish to leave behind? And what do I need to add to continue to honor? We know that grief needs to be honored and witnessed. It does not need to be fixed. There is nothing wrong with people who are grieving, right? That's a normal reaction to people that we love, that we've lost. It doesn't need to be fixed. And oftentimes our supporters want to fix our pain, right? They want to take away the sadness. And I think people are good people and they mean well. They just are uncomfortable with how they can experience that and help you with grief. This is just kind of an example of continuing the bond. This is actually in the United States in Washington State Park. There's a phone in the wind. There's actually a phone that's in the forest, and you can go there, dial up your loved one's number, and have a conversation with your loved one. Okay, that's called continuing the bond, continuing that connection with our loved one. How do we honor them on a regular basis? Here at GrieveWell, we kind of put together kind of the journey of grief kind of in this picture that just kind of talks about the pain of grief, kind of the tow truck of getting stuck, the fallen wires, and we'll get up to the fallen wires of anniversaries, special days, and holidays. But it just gives people an idea of kind of what to expect kind of on your grief journey. So we took a little bit of those different frameworks and kind of added it into this roadmap here. Does anybody feel comfortable sharing where they see themselves in their own grief journey? Are you early on in your grief? Are you kind of in the middle? Pardon me? Yes.
Today, it changes.
Yes.
I think I'm probably pretty close to the end, but it's taken about 20 years.
Okay. Okay.
When I say the end, I mean the full life after loss.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. All right. There is a labyrinth up here. The labyrinth is not a maze, and there are no dead ends or no wrong turns. There is only one way forward. So too is it with grief. The only way through it is forward, with many turns and going back and forth over what seems like the same territory. Similar to grief, right? We go over and over the similar territory. So let's talk about kind of special days and holidays, because this is kind of that season coming up. But I do want to caution you. There are other days other than the holidays that can be grief triggering for us as well. Those can be anniversaries, those can be death days, those can be birthdays, but also an ordinary Saturday can be difficult too. So I just kind of want to caution people with that as well. We'll talk about kind of the holidays, but this can apply to kind of any of those days as well that kind of come up with us. I'm hoping that you'll be able to kind of understand a little bit about grief triggers and what your grief triggers are, kind of looking at your holiday values and what's important to you, and then being able to come up with a holiday plan as we're entering the holiday season. So that's kind of the whole purpose today, is just to kind of give you this information so that you have it so as you going into the holiday season for yourself. One of the things to kind of think about is whenever we experience kind of a natural disaster, we have to kind of survey the damage, right, before we're able to rebuild, okay? That is similar true to grief and our emotions, right? We have to kind of survey the damage of our emotions from the loss, and how do we kind of rebuild that life, okay? What does that look like? And one of the things to kind of think about is mourning our past holidays and special days. So some things to kind of think about for yourself is, when will I feel the absence of my loved one the most during this holiday season? What is the biggest fear I have about the holiday season as I'm entering the holiday season without my loved one? What is my biggest fear that I have? What roles did my loved one fulfill as we celebrated the holiday? Maybe they had a special role that they took place in. Maybe they baked all the cookies, or maybe they cut down the Christmas tree. And what traditions will I need to or want to change? And it's okay to do that. There may be traditions, family traditions that you have that you may want to change this year. That's okay. You may want to adapt. You may want to add something different. It's okay. Next year you can try something different as well. So one of the things to think about, again, is questions to kind of just to start thinking about for yourself. These kind of 4 questions about the holidays past. Grief triggers are anything that brings up memories and emotions related to your loss. And during the holidays, especially the holidays, there are many, many grief triggers out there. There could be sounds, sights, songs, foods, smells, objects, right, during the holiday season. There are so many of them. And so one of the things that's important to do is to kind of take inventory for yourself of what are some grief triggers. You have in your handout there, you have this chart that's in there, and I'm just going to give you a few moments to think about for yourself what are some grief triggers for you this holiday season. I know one for me is Christmas songs. There's a specific Christmas song for me that I have to avoid because that'll just kind of send me into a tailspin, right? And I do my best to not play the Christmas music, because I know sometimes in September I think some radio stations start playing Christmas music, so I just kind of avoid that station, right? But so kind of identifying for yourself what are some of those things, what are the grief triggers that you have. So I'm going to give you a few moments to do that, or if anybody would like to share them, if you feel comfortable doing that, we can do that as well. Anybody feel comfortable sharing a grief trigger? Yes.
I have a question about triggers.
Sure.
I have heard that if you have a
Just
fear of,
excuse me, just wait a second, because we have to get it on the mic for the people watching.
I have heard that if you have a fear of flying in an airplane, you can take a kind of a course in that where you go on an airplane that's on the ground and you sit in the seat and you experience what you might experience if you were really in the air. Is it good to, you mentioned avoiding triggers. You avoid a special Christmas song that does negative things to you? Or does enduring the trigger and working your way through it actually strengthen you as compared to the airplane situation? Mm-hmm. The same thing might apply to a child allergic to peanut butter. I have heard that tiny, minute amounts of peanut butter strengthen a reaction in the child that they would no longer be. So I wonder how much one has to avoid triggers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. Yes, so what you're talking about is what we call exposure therapy, right? So if I have a fear of something, you kind of divide it up into different exposures and you work with your anxiety to kind of keep that under control, right? In terms of grief triggers, there's a plan that you can do, right? And we'll talk about, the next slide is talking about what that plan is for grief triggers. There are some grief triggers that you can't avoid, right? It just happens, and there are some things you can control and you can't control. And so I think during kind of the holiday season, depending on where you are in your grief journey, you can make that decision if those are some grief triggers early on that I have to avoid because they're too difficult and painful to deal with at this time. Or I can make a plan to cope with those grief triggers because I know some of them are going to happen kind of out of the blue. The example that I used about that Christmas song, I can avoid that Christmas song, right? I can turn that off or it starts playing on the radio. However, if I'm at the dentist, okay, and I'm sitting there getting my teeth cleaned and all of a sudden that song comes on, I can't avoid that, right? There's nothing that I'm able to do at that moment to turn it off, right? So then I'm going to have to learn kind of some skills to cope with that grief trigger. So there's no really right or wrong way to answer that question. I think what you're talking about too is the exposure therapy. I want to get over that fear of flying. I want to get over that fear of spiders. And so we use that type of therapy to help with that individual. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Did I answer your question? Okay. Okay. All right. Yep. So those are, I just would encourage everybody to kind of just take inventory of their triggers for themselves. It's just helpful to be able to recognize kind of what they are. So coping with grief triggers. Anticipate grief triggers you know will likely occur and think about ways you're going to handle that situation, okay? I may be in Costco having my cart full of food and then all of a sudden that Christmas song comes on. One of my other grief triggers is my loved one had really these deep blue eyes, and so sometimes walking through Costco, somebody's approaching you and they have those deep blue eyes, right? I can see my loved one's eyes and that person, right? That's a grief trigger for me. I can't avoid that. I can't predict that that's going to happen. So what I do is look at ways that I can handle that. What can I do when I'm in that situation, right? It may be in terms of, for myself, there may be times I have to leave the cart there and go to my car and cry and then be able to come back. There may be other times when I can smile and say, gosh, I feel that person's love with me. They just wanted to know that I'm here today. They're here with me today, right? So it just depends on kind of that day for me in terms of how to cope with that. But you kind of look at ways that you can handle that situation. The anticipation of having a negative experience at the holiday is usually worse than what actually occurs. Sometimes what happens is we work ourselves up so much and with anxiety that this day is going to be horrible that when it actually comes, it's not as bad as what we anticipated it to be. I see lots of shaking of heads, right? Okay. Let yourself experience your emotions. Oftentimes we try to avoid it and stuff it down. Allow ourselves to be able to do that. There's an old saying which is, what we run from pursues us, and what we confront transforms us, right? We often, when we run from it, it's continuing to be there, right? And have an exit plan. I often tell people, have an exit plan. Have a plan A and plan B. For example, if I'm going to a holiday party, I may tell the hostess at the time, if I leave without saying goodbye, it just was too overwhelming for me. I don't mean any offense by that. Just know that, right? So I'm kind of alerting that person ahead of time. It may be if I'm coming to a Christmas holiday at church, I may sit in the back pew, or I may sit on the end, so that if I need to leave, I'm not kind of interrupting everybody, or just can have an exit plan. So it's really important to kind of think about for yourself as well, having an exit plan and having option A and B, and sometimes C, because you don't know that day when you wake up what you're going to feel like, right? Because every day is different, every hour is different, and so you may wake up and feel like you're able to do this, and you do that for like an hour, and then it just doesn't feel right, so you just kind of leave. Okay. Holiday values. Holiday values I wanted to talk about with you because I think they're really important. We know that values are not goals, right? They're not a goal. It's something that guides us, okay? Something that's important to us that guides us. And so one of the things that's helpful is to define what your holiday values are to you and decide what traditions you want to change and skip altogether, okay? There are many values out there and different categories of values, but that's important to figure out for yourself during the holidays. What values are important to me? What values are important to me as a family? Is it important that we spend time together? Is it important that we help people in need? Is it important that I spend time with my friends and my family? What are those values to you? You have in your handout a special day value, their hearts, and kind of thinking about for yourself, really looking at what your values are. Do you have your connection with your loved one? What's your value with that? How do you want to remember and have that connection with your loved one? Is there a value you have about health and physical well-being? What about community and service? What about family, friends, spirituality? Okay, there are many other values. I just kind of put a few up there. But again, thinking about what is important to you, especially as we're going into the holiday season, okay, so that we can incorporate that in our holiday plan. So usually I give people a few moments to kind of think about that and be able to write that down. But we'll just continue forward. You have that in your handout that you can do kind of at your home and reflect for yourself. So holiday and special plan, here is kind of some things to kind of think about. Honor your emotions and feelings and ask yourself where you are now at this moment. It's really important to be able to kind of honor those feelings that you have and be able to allow yourself to feel those emotions. Again, we're not shoving it down. We're being able to do that. Oftentimes people feel like if I have this feeling and I allow myself, it's never going to go away, right? Feelings dissipate. They reach a certain level and they go down. And so it's kind of allowing ourselves to honor our feelings and emotions. Order your priorities. Take inventory of your triggers and values and what is important to you. You know, what is the priority? Is the priority making those four dozen cookies this year, right? We don't have to do that. We don't have to send out all those Christmas cards. We don't have to bake all those cookies, right? We can also kind of make a list for people to help us out with that, right? Who's in charge? You know, in your family, who's really good at doing, maybe somebody's really good at baking. Maybe somebody's good at running errands. We don't have to wrap all those gifts this year. We don't have to do all those things, okay? And oftentimes we kind of put that in our lap of we have to do all these things, and we don't. Plan ahead, make plans, communicate and honor differences, have an exit strategy, be careful of the shoulds, and manage expectations. I'm going to put in here as well with children, communicate and honor differences in your family. Everybody may have their own plan of what's really important to them. And so if you're living in a family is making sure that you include other people in that plan as well. Maybe you have kids and you know, what's really important to them is making sure that there's special ornaments on the Christmas tree, right? So that we're honoring their grief as well. So with family, it's really important to communicate that. Also have an exit strategy. Careful about managing shoulds, right? We have all these expectations that we have upon ourselves, right? I don't know how many for Thanksgiving had to make all those extra sides, right? We should do this. This is the way we've always done it. We have to do it this way, right? It doesn't need to be that way. And it's okay if you need to change it. Pardon me?
I love your typo.
Oh.
Have an exist strategy.
Oh, yes. 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 Thank you. Thank you for, yes. Yes. That is actually true, right? Yep. Yep. And embrace the memories, execute a plan, and open your heart. Let people help you. Oftentimes people may ask you, you know, please, I could do something, you know, come over to my house, you know, or I'll bring something. Let people help you. It's okay to offer people, you know, take people up on their offer. If you're supporting somebody in grief, a word of advice is offer something specific. Oftentimes family and friends will say, call me if you need something. You know, what do you need? We don't know what we need, to be honest with you. And today is different than what we need, you know, tomorrow or the next hour. So if you offer something specific, you know, I'm going to the grocery store, can I pick you up anything, right? Or I'm coming over, I have extra wrapping paper, I'm going to come help you wrap some gifts. That's offering something specific, okay? So just kind of a word of advice if you're here supporting somebody in grief, that's often very helpful for people. I put this in here. You have this kind of in your handout, making your holiday special day plan. This is kind of looking at, you know, what traditions you have. Do I want to do them this year? Do I want to skip it? How do I feel? What do I need to add? What else could I do? So I think it's helpful for people if you go through this chart with them at home or making inventory of yourself of what traditions are important to you, and then kind of decide if you want to keep it, skip it, or make changes to it. Here is another handout. You know, every day of the month, honor your grief. Kind of write down in terms of your calendar how you're honoring your grief or how you're honoring your loved one or even yourself this holiday season. How are you doing that? Here's another activity called the mind mapping activity, and this is where you kind of put your loved one's name in the center. So for example, if I put let's say I lost a parent and I put my mom's name kind of in the center. And then from there, we as a family, kind of the bigger circles, we kind of write down things that she liked, things that kind of represent her. So maybe she was really good at photography, or maybe she did baking, or maybe she traveled, she liked to travel. And so I kind of write those in the outer circle. And then the other little circles on the outside would be kind of like, so for example, baking. Let's use the top one, baking, and then there's 3 little circles. I would write down the 3 things that she loved to bake. Maybe it's her, coffee cake, maybe it's some sugar cookies, and maybe it's a certain kind of pie that she baked, okay? And then we would, as a family, kind of decide how we wanted to honor her, which is, let's say we're going to make that coffee cake this year. We're not going to make all of them, but we're going to pick one of those that we're going to do. So that's just kind of a way of talking about what this does too is open up communication with family members to tell stories about their loved one, right? Oh gosh, remember when mom, she baked the coffee cake and she forgot to add the yeast, so it came out and it looked like, this flat pancake in the oven. Remember that time? Or remember that time we had to make all those sugar cookies? So you get to have that conversation about your loved one. Here is another example. If you have family members who live far away, this is called a kudo board, and you can kind of create one so that other family members in different states or different regions can add to it, right? This is kind of, we just added a picture, remembering Carol this Christmas, and then kind of putting it down, the picture of this person. So you can kind of add your own as the whole family can contribute to it, because they may not be present with you in the state. Here is another one. I actually do this at my house. Some people can't do that, and that's okay. But my loved one always has a place at the table. So whether it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, or just kind of the daily thing, we have an empty chair, and there's a placemat for our loved one that's not there. During the holiday, we make that person's special dish and put that on their placemat. We may have pictures kind of on there, but everybody knows in my family when they come over that there is this placemat, and that's where my loved one, just to have a place at the table to honor them that holiday season. Okay. So some tips for navigating special days and holidays. I think one of the things to remember is your self-care. It's really important that sometimes we don't take care of ourselves during this time. And so making sure that we're eating, making sure we're getting rest, making sure we're avoiding drugs and alcohol, right, during this time. And just taking that extra time for ourselves. Trying to also getting out of nature. Trees don't care if you cry. Taking a walk in nature, spending time with nature as well. I think allow yourself to feel. Again, we sometimes tend to push our feelings down. It's important to allow ourselves to feel what's ever bubbling up. I promise you the feelings are going to dissipate. It's not going to be at that same level all the time. And allowing yourself to feel whatever it is that you're feeling that day. Set limits. It's okay to say no. It's okay to tell them that you're not able. I use the example about baking the 4 dozen cookies. It's okay to set the limits for that, that you're just not able to do that this year. And maybe you don't want to return to that ever. Some people, I hear stories about people who say they make these holiday dinners and then they're in bed for 3 days because they can't get up because of all the work that they did. Why are we doing that to ourselves, right? We need to kind of also have some self-care for ourselves. Caring, allow other people to help you, right? Allowing other people to take up on their offers. Remember your loved one, however you want to hold and honor that memory with them. How do you remember your loved one that day, throughout the day, continuing that bond with them, continuing that connection? And hope. One of our peer counselors, early on in grief, people lose their hope, right? They don't have hope. So our peer counselors actually hold on to that hope until you can find it again, right? You're sitting across from somebody who's been there, who's experienced that loss, and who's thriving again. So we hold that hope until you can find it again. here is, I don't know if you've ever gone to Refuge in Grief, but I suggest that's a great website to go to. There will be another one that I'll talk about. But this is from Megan Devine, and she wrote the book, It's Okay Not to Be Okay. I don't know if anybody has read that, but that's an awesome book to read. She came up with this little comic strip, you know, travel someplace new for the holiday season. Look for small moments of comfort. Get out in nature, volunteer, aim for peace rather than holiday joy. Have an exit plan for your holiday parties. Wear headphones out in public to avoid holiday music. I guess that's how you could do that, right? Wear those headphones. Give grief a place at your table. Include them in rituals. Connect with other grieving people. Find comfort, a comfortable place to be sad, and spend quiet time with friends. Do what feels right for you. I just put a few reminders up that I just wanted to share with people. Special days and holidays after a loss are hard. Go easy on yourself. Again, we can cut back all those traditions. We don't have to do everything that we've done before. You are not responsible to meet anybody else's holiday wants at the expense of your own. Your connection to your loved one does not live in your pain. It lives in your love for them and your memories and the way they live on in your life. I'm going to say that one again because that's a big one, because we hold on to that pain. Your connection to your loved one does not live in your pain. It lives in your love for them, your memories, and the way that you live on they live on in your life. Your ability to make space for joy in a world without your loved one is not a betrayal. Right? Oftentimes we worry about we can't be happy or we can't feel joy. We can live within the and, right? We can feel sad and joy. We can be grieving and have moments of happiness, right? And oftentimes we're so black and white with that there's such a gray zone in there, right? So we can make space for joy in our world, and that's not a betrayal. We're always going to miss our loved one, and we're always thinking about them. Short of amnesia, I don't think we'll ever forget our loved one, right? Your grief and your love for the person you've lost will always live fully and deeply alongside your joy. They walk alongside you. Okay? If you are supporting somebody in grief, I just wanted to give you a few slides, because oftentimes we have people come to these workshops that have not lost somebody, but they're here to support somebody, their grieving loved one. The best gifts that you have to offer is your ear, is your listening ear, right? Is to be there to listen. Your desire to understand what they're experiencing and going through, not the intent to respond. Oftentimes when we're sitting with somebody, we have the intent to respond, you know, that's what we want to do, as opposed to just sitting and listening and trying to understand. Our enduring, compassionate presence, right? Just being there, holding that space for them, right? We don't need to fix grief. Grief doesn't need to be fixed. It's holding that space for them. Being non-judgmental, that's a big one. Oftentimes people will handle grief or do something differently than what we may not agree with. But we shouldn't be judging that, right? Like, oh my gosh, why is she doing this? Why is she handling grief this way? Okay, we have to be non-judgmental about that. Well, every grief journey is unique, right? It's unique as our thumbprint. So even though I may have lost a loved one and you lost the same loved one, we may have some similarities, but I don't truly connect with her in terms of her own grief. That's her loss, right? It's unique as her thumbprint. And time. Be there for the long haul. Oftentimes people are there, but long after the casserole dishes get returned, to be there for your loved one and support them. Caring and feeding for your grieving friend. Again, this is from Refuge in Grief. Leave them care packages. Be specific about how you can help. Ask questions, right? Talk about their loved one. Remembering the big days, but also acknowledging the little days. Parallel play, just being with them, right? You don't really have to say anything, it's just being there. Women usually have intimacy, face to face, and men have activities shoulder to shoulder. So again, just kind of the parallel play. I'm generalizing, that's not for everybody. Say their name, say their loved one's name. Let them be sad and be awkward. It's okay to say, I don't know what to say, just know that I care, right? I just care about you. I don't know what to say. I can't take away that pain. And if you're helping your grieving friend during the special holidays, be supportive of the way the person chose to handle the holiday or special day, right? Let's not be judgmental about how they choose to handle that. Offer specific help. Maybe invite your loved one to your house this holiday season. If they've always had Christmas or they've always had Thanksgiving, maybe you can invite them to your holiday party. Donate a gift money or in honor and memory of their loved one. Just listen to what they're saying. Reach out, remind them that you're thinking of them, right? Again, it's avoiding like, how are you, right? I don't know if anybody's had that, but even when you're going through the grocery store, people calling up, people will just say, how are you? How are you doing? You don't really want to know how I'm feeling, and I may not share with you truly how I'm feeling that day, right? Because I may be full of rage or anger, and that may be scary for some people. And so kind of just asking them, like, it's today, how are you feeling today? Or how are you feeling at this moment, right? As opposed to kind of general. Or the one that I love the most, when people would call you up and just say, it's just so nice to hear your voice today. Just wanted to talk to you. It's so nice to hear your voice. Reach out to them. Let them know you're thinking of them. All right.
Do you want to take a few questions?
Sure.
We have a few more
Sure.
minutes.
Sure.
If people have questions.
I did put in the packet, there is an article from What's Your Grief. I don't know if you've ever been to that website. Again, that is a fabulous website. I encourage everybody to go to What's Your Grief. But if any of the stuff that I said doesn't resonate with you, they have a sheet that you have in your packet. There are 64 ways to kind of cope and handle the holiday and honor your loved one. So if something I said didn't work for you, then again, there would be 64 other ways to kind of cope with the holiday. So look on that list to see if anything resonates with you.
There was a question.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a two-part question. So is this only in Ann Arbor or a surrounding area, or is this statewide, national? And then my second question, I might just lose it right now. For someone who is dealing with Alzheimer's, this is my sister-in-law. I just came back from my brother's, and she's pretty much gone. So I'm really trying to help him because he's not grieving very well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the first part of your question is we provide peer support to the whole state of Michigan. So anybody from Michigan can access that. Any of our workshops or any of our creative healing series can be from anybody. We have people from 23 states and 5 countries that have joined those workshops, but specifically the peer support will be just for the state of Michigan. After the first of the year, we're expanding. We're actually going to be the first grief organization to go onto a college campus. And so we're actually going to go to Arizona State University first. And so we'll provide peer support for the whole state of Arizona. We're hoping, our goal is nationally is to be able to have a GrieveWell center in the whole, in all the states, and that everybody can access peer support. And then your second question related to Alzheimer's and dementia. Yeah, that's very difficult in terms of what we call anticipatory grief, right? It's you're with that person and you're grieving along, even though they're physically still present with us. And that's really difficult to do. I would recommend that they reach out to like the Alzheimer's Association. They're very helpful with that, because each time you see that person, you're getting a different person, right? Depending on the day. And how well they're doing or not doing, and how aware they are or not aware. Yeah.
I was just so pleased to see that you're offering a grief baking, and I was going to say that if you'd like to offer grief eating, there's several of us that would be happy to teach that course for you.
Okay.
We have a grieving friend in the church who told me after her dad died that it was her season of cheese.
Yeah.
She was entering her season of cheese.
Yeah.
Also, I just wanted to say about your slide about what we can do to help other people, listening to them, asking what we could do. I hope that people will do that for the long term, not just the first year, because so many people in my first year of grief were really great, but I didn't really begin grieving until the second or even now the third year. So
Yes.
now is the time when I really want people to call and say, can I wrap your presents? Because I'll say yes.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you. Yes, that is true. Being there for the long haul, right? And we know that grief lasts as long as love lasts. And actually, sometimes year 2 is much more difficult than year 1. And so, we talk about kind of, if you look at kind of acute grief and mature grief and early grief, acute grief is kind of the early part of it, and there's really no timeline for that. But it's oftentimes when you listen to people say, I begin to catch my breath, like I can finally catch my breath. And then, we have in terms of kind of that early grief, and early grief can be, many, many years. And then the mature grief is the rest of our lives, right, that we grieve. And again, our life grows around grief. We get bigger, and that the jagged holes become softened. But there are different things in each of those parts of grief that are important to remember. So yes, thank you for that. Yes. Yep.
I've also been thinking about there's other things that people grieve besides people, and situations, for example, that have changed, or relationships that have changed. So there's not a person that's necessarily gone, but there's something just as difficult. Sometimes it's just grief that you have because it feels like you can't again fix it or change it back. So I don't know if this is not especially a question, but I think grief can be multifaceted. Probably.
Yes, I agree. Yep. And we grieve and mourn 1,000 times in our lives, right? It's anything that we didn't want to change that happens, right? It doesn't have to be death. But also related to grief, and we didn't get into this because this is more of we have a workshop, kind of Grief 101, Understanding Grief, which goes deep dive into all of this. But there's something called secondary losses that we grieve, right? And those are things like, if you think about kind of grief, if you think about throwing a rock kind of in the water and you have that big splash and then you have that ripple effect, that's true with grief, right? The big splash is the loss of our loved one, and then that ripple effect is secondary losses. And secondary losses are things that we grieve for, right? It could be kind of loss of social support, loss of our role, right? Loss of finances. Maybe it's loss of home, loss of future. Maybe we had plans to retire with our loved one, our spouse, and go on all these trips and had this plan, and that's not happening anymore because we've lost our loved one. And so now we have to grieve that loss. We can have loss of financial support, loss of home. Maybe we have to sell our house or move because of the loss. And so those are all secondary losses that we have, that we grieve, and that's created just by one loss of our loved one. But it can also be the day-to-day stuff. I mean, maybe you loaded the dishwasher and your husband unloaded, or your spouse unloaded the dishwasher. Maybe it's somebody did the cooking and somebody did the cleaning up. Maybe it's somebody did the banking or the checkbooks. I mean, it could be any of those things kind of on a daily basis as too that we're grieving the loss.
Will have to be the last one.
Okay, I wanted to share something. Melissa talked when we watched. We did it on Zoom. The Doom, Life After Doom, and she mentioned Richard Rohr, and we had in Lunch and Learn with the we had a talk on Chautauqua People, some of you were there probably. And we went to a Chautauqua, our first one, and it was based, the theme was the second half of life. And who's speaking but Richard Rohr. So we went and listened to him talk about some of his, he's written many books. They're very fascinating. I would recommend them to all of them. But anyway, someone, after the talk, they said, he said, Richard Rohr said, are there any questions or comments, just like we're doing right now? And this woman stood up and said, my husband died yesterday. Oh. And how do I deal with this? And I thought, this is going to be a real test of Richard Rohr, what he says. And he said, find 2 or 3 of your best friends and talk with them about it. This group is not the place. This isn't a good time. I feel your pain, but this isn't the right place. So I think sometimes you have to find that friend, and that's a way to help you with grief.
Correct. And you'll find out, with all of our friend groups, right, we find out kind of who the listeners are, those that you can call in the middle of the night and will be there, you know who the doers are, those that you can say, hey, cut my grass or take my kids or go take my dog for a walk, and then there are also those listeners, right, those people that, we talked about the listeners that you can call at 2 o'clock, but also the people that if you need to have fun, right, and just distract you. We have a postcard, I didn't bring it, but there's a postcard that actually is some cute ideas, like, I can, go on Amazon and get you, Kleenex boxes. What can I do? But they're fun, lighthearted things, and we all need that in our lives, right? So we also have people that can do that as well. And unfortunately, there are some people that don't have that support, and I think that's where GrieveWell kind of fills that space. Is if you don't have somebody to support you, or you feel like you've burned out your friends and family, because oftentimes we may feel that too. We don't want to be the downer when we're going out with our friend group, but we still want to be able to process and talk about our grief. Give us a call, because we have peer counselors that we can match you up with. They can meet you virtually if you choose. They can talk to you on the phone. If you're local and our peer counselor's local, they can meet up with you at a coffee shop. We don't go to people's homes. We can go for a walk. Sometimes people go for a walk with their peer counselor. So again, GrieveWell is there to help with that if you're feeling like you need extra support. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
you're welcome.
Christy. There's a little gift we have.
Thank you.
A small light inside here, but
Thank you.
For us, it will be when we see the lights over the holidays and the special days. Most of us will be having our own conversations with our own griefs. To grieve is to be human. It is the human condition. And thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
For others.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm looking for my glasses.
Oh, are they? Oh, you're welcome. Oh, no, that's okay.